All right. We are thrilled today to have three district representatives here with us. I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves in just a moment, but we're going to have a panel. As you've probably noticed, there are a lot of you on this call today, and we're excited for how much participation there is. And we want to make sure that you have a chance to ask your questions to the panel as well. So the way that this is going to work is that we'll start out with two questions. You see them here on the screen right now, and the panelists will answer them, give you their thoughts. Then we're going to open it up to you for your questions. If you have a question you would like to ask the panel, please use the Q&A feature and give your question there. That way I'll be able to see them, see if we have multiple of the same question coming in, and I will ask them aloud to the panelists that way. That way they're not having to also look at question boxes and everyone stays on the same page. We will not be taking questions from the chat, so please do not put questions there and instead use the Q&A feature. If you have any other technical issues or questions that are coming up, by all means use the chat. We will have staff monitoring it, but for anything you would like a panelist to answer, please make sure to put that in the Q&A portion. All right, and with that, we're going to let our panel introduce themselves, and we're actually going to stop sharing the screen so that you can see everyone and see their faces instead of just the PowerPoint. So we'll start on my screen. Debbie, you are up at the top. So we'll start with you and have you introduce yourself to the group and your experience with curriculum adoption.
Okay, hi, my name is Debbie Hudgens, and currently I'm an early childhood instructional coach for A-Leaf ISD, which we are in Southwest Houston. Then the previous adoption for the K through 6 ELA adoption, I was the kindergarten facilitator for that. And then this year I have the same role working with my team on adopting for pre-K. We're very excited about it. I also was able to work on creating the rubric with TEA. So that was a wonderful experience and gave me a lot of insight.
Great, thank you. And Amy, let's move on to you.
Hi, my name is Amy Wright, and I am 2 years into retirement from a 23-year career in education. But my experience with adoption came as I was the ELA curriculum specialist for New Braunfels ISD, which is a district with 9 elementary campuses. So I led our K through 5 teachers through the curriculum and adoption process, and served on the Texas Resource Review as a reviewer during the pilot, and in subsequent cycles did various jobs helping to write evidence guides and serving as a content expert for the Foundational Literacy Review.
Thanks, Amy. And last but not least, we'll move on to Ron.
Good afternoon. I'm Ron Winkleman. I'm in El Paso Independent School District. I've been the coordinator for instructional materials here for approximately 5 years. I have worked with Dana and Melissa with the Texas Resource Review this last year, and really enjoyed being able to work with them and all the tools they have provided us. Thank you.
Thank all of you for your introductions. So our first question that we'll start with today is, in your work with curriculum adoption, what have you found to be the most helpful tools or processes? And I will open that up to whoever would like to start.
I'd be happy to start. So I felt like that was one of my most challenging jobs as a curriculum specialist for our district, was just having the heavy weight of knowing that I wanted all stakeholders involved in the review and adoption, and yet had never done it before as a leader, only as a participant. So as I started the process, I looked into what do we use to review materials. And subsequently, it was the same time that Texas Resource Review got started. And I thought, if I become a reviewer, I could from the inside see how to review materials and then bring what I learned back to my district and possibly in a modified way. And so that's what I did. So taking the rubric that Texas Resource used and the knowledge that I got from that, I took that back to my district and formed a committee, partnering with principals, asking them for experts on their campuses um, recommend representatives, and we met as a committee, used a very, very thorough rubric based on what I had learned, and started reviewing materials together, getting it down to 2 choices before we presented the same rubric to teachers, presented the materials to the teachers, and gave them access to the materials for them to be able to review. And then each teacher was able to vote. Each campus chose a K2 product and a 3-5 product in English and in Spanish. And then each campus came together as a district, the representatives came, and we had an open vote on that. And it was actually a unanimous vote for K2 and almost -1 unanimous vote. So I felt like what I learned as a reviewer in the pilot, bringing it back to our district, was one of the greatest tools that I had, along with using all stakeholders and listening to them in order for us to set goals and questions, essential questions for choosing our instructional materials.
I'll go next. First of all, our process is ever changing. Every year it changes a little bit on how we do things, if we find errors in what we did or find something better. And of course, COVID-19 caused a little bit of a shift, but thankfully, one of my big processes was when I first got in there was to use technology for the voting process, to use a lot of technology on that side of it. So it doesn't hinder us. So we're still using all the technology. But some of the processes that I found were really helpful was, first of all, we used Texas Resource Review this last year to basically break it down into, we want to get down to 3 publishers. So our teachers are only looking at 3 companies rather than looking at all the companies. So we use the Texas Resource Review tool first to break it down into three publishers. And then what we did was, as our teachers went through everything on Texas Resource Review, they came up with questions they still had of the publishers. So they went through and made a huge list of questions. We sent all those lists to the 3 publishers. They answered it for the teachers, and then we invited them to do their presentation. We videotaped the presentation because we know not every teacher can leave campus during that time. So we videotaped the presentations, and then we sent the videotaped presentations to the actual schools so that the teachers did have access to looking at that. A couple other changes that we have made that I think were very important in the process was, rather than it just being, before it was just the teachers did all the voting, the teachers looked at the material, no one else really went through it, maybe the curriculum looked at some of it. What we have done is we have a campus instructional material team, and then we have a district instructional material team. And since a lot of the material is now becoming digital, we actually make sure that there's someone from technology, from the IT program on there, to make sure that the material would work with, because we use Schoology and we use ClassLink as our single sign-on. We want to make sure that material is already working with those 2 companies. We put on basically a dual language teacher, an ESL teacher when we're doing the English or some of the other areas, to make sure that they say, yeah, this material is good for those groups. Same with, we make sure they have a special ed person on their committees to help them decide. So it's not just necessarily the teacher anymore. We have more people. And then of course, we ask the parents to look over the material and see if they have any comments on the material during that time. But those are some of the tools we use. And then, of course, our district, one of the processes that all materials must be dual language because we are a dual language district. So they must have an English and Spanish component to the material. And they must meet 100% of the TEKS for the exact reason earlier you heard. I don't want to be looking for supplemental material afterwards. So we have that the publisher must meet 100% of the TEKS, so we don't have to look for that extra material.
So you guys have said a lot of the same things we did, so I'll try to focus on some of the things that were a little bit different. One thing we did was we started out talking to our purchasing and procurement department so that we could see what their timelines, their deadlines, and their timeline and guidelines for us were. And so then we could create our timeline going backwards to make sure that we were able to do everything we wanted to do by their deadlines. So that really helped us to stay on track with allowing plenty of time that we could meet with publishers, we could get the materials in our hands and to our teachers, and still be able also to meet with publishers more than one time. Since the ELA team had just done this as the pre-K team, we met with them for their expertise and their guidance. And then we created our own team, similar to what you said, Ron. We created our team, our curriculum team from the instruction department, including special ed, ECSE, because of it being pre-K, the SLE department. So our district committee was made up of several people. And then our early childhood department committee, we used the Texas Resource Review to help us develop a rubric that we knew we wanted to use. And it had some really great things. We were able to look at it and pull what are our big rocks and what pieces on the rubric matched our district, our department big rocks. Looking at those, we wanted to look at data, which you all mentioned this morning, definitely. What does our district need? But we have some program changes coming up in pre-K as we go to full day, and as we're going to be opening some pre-K centers. So we know we have some programming changes. So we really wanted to develop our big rocks based on those pieces as well. So that was part of all of that process. We certainly involved teachers. We had some criteria that we developed with our team and also from the instructional department team. How do we pick the teachers? We have 24 elementary campuses. We have almost 90 pre-K teachers. So we wanted to we couldn't use everybody, unfortunately. So we wanted to know how to pick between the bilingual classrooms, the monolingual classrooms, each campus and all of that. So we created that teacher team as well. We did use technology to get our vote. That was very, very helpful. And then we had we had 2 meetings with the teacher team. And then we scheduled a vendor showcase for the teachers after we had already met with vendors 2 or 3 times as our committee. So it's been a very, very busy process for sure. And we're not finished yet, but trying to keep all these pieces in place. But the bottom line is a lot what you said this morning and guided us to do was create that vision and develop our big rocks so that as we looked at the curriculum, we would know what best met our needs.
Great, thank you. So you've all shared a little bit about something that worked really well for you. Now thinking about the flip side of that, what is something, thinking back on your last curriculum adoption process, that you would change? You could go back and do it again. What is something that you would change about your last round of this process?
I will share that there were a couple of things that I would change in the last round. Thankfully, now we do have the Texas Resource Review reports. So I would have loved to have those when we did our adoption, but that was not developed yet. But I would absolutely utilize those in the upcoming round. And I sound like an advertisement, but I'm telling you, it would have saved us hours and hours and hours of work of and teachers don't have the time to put that in. While I would ask for additional questions, just like Ronald said, The other thing that I would do is we were guaranteed that we would have support and training in our adoption, and that was carried through. But I would have been clearer on what our needs were, being a one-to-one iPad district. Um, Technology was involved along the way, but it can always be tricky. And we are very technology based in my district. And so the usability of what we purchased needed to be very clear before it was in the hands of teachers. And so I would have asked more questions about the usability and then the support for the training afterwards.
There's I kind of had a smooth adoption last year because I used the Texas Resource Review. The only thing I may change was actually having the teachers, after we decide on the top three, really go into the Texas Resource Review and keep using that as one of the tools in order to determine what fits them best. Because I don't always feel that the teachers have the time to really go into this material and really look at it and make sure it's exactly what they want. So I think that would be where there may be a little bit of a change. It's just the more use of the Texas Resource Review. So I think that really did help us right away to come up with 3 publishers real quick, make those determinations.
For us, this when we think about what we did before, particularly with the kindergarten adoption, we would have dug deeper and asked more questions about the schedule of the typical day, just to be sure that we had a good picture of how each component of the instruction could actually fit in our daily schedule. So that would be something we would do differently. We definitely would have gone through the process of creating the vision and identifying our big rocks. We did not do that so much in the kindergarten adoption, but we definitely did it this year. Like you, Amy, we would have asked a lot more questions about the PD options. We knew it was offered. We knew that, and it wasn't that it wasn't good PD, but there were a lot of particulars about the professional development options that if we should have asked more clarity and more specifics on that. And then the only other thing is we would have looked closer at the opportunities for formative assessment. We got a lot of information about how to use the unit assessments or the online assessments or the summative, but in early childhood, in kindergarten, well, in any grade, really, that ongoing observational formative assessment is so important. And so we would have pressed more for that to try to find out more about how that's supported in the curriculum. And of course, the TRR makes that one of the pieces, one of the sections. So it definitely helps this year to make sure we're looking for that too.
Thank you so much. So we have our first question from the audience. And again, keep putting those questions in the Q&A so we can make sure you get those answers. So our first question is, did you ask for samples from all publishers before making your decision?
We did, and we had a set sent to our instruction team and a set sent to every single campus so that the teachers on the campuses had plenty of time to look at the materials. We narrowed it down to 3 like you, Ron.
Yeah, and we only asked for the 3. If others sent, that was okay, but we just asked them to send it to the campus when we do it. We only asked for the 3 publishers we narrowed it down to. We also use a lot of the digital samples originally that TEA supplies the actual samples that the publishers give to help also do the narrow down. They can look at that earlier, those samples.
We relied very heavily on the digital samples that publishers provided, and did have some physical samples, but relied mostly on the digital samples given the criteria that we had for in our budget. So that it was important to us that the teachers knew the digital side clearly.
Great. And a lot of you have mentioned this idea of taking your list down to just 3 or 2 or 3, narrowing down to your top products. Was there any pushback for you narrowing that list down? The question says that makes a lot of sense, but is wondering if you received any pushback for narrowing the list down in advance.
No, we had no pushback at all with that. And actually, I think our teachers preferred that because they didn't have to worry about looking through as much material.
We
did not
haven't
either.
heard any pushback, no.
Yeah. I think because we had 5 samples for our committee, and then they pared it down before the teachers were given the 2 samples. They trusted the committee to be able to vet that for them.
And our instruction department committee, we met with, I can't remember if it was 5 or 6. We narrowed it down to maybe 6 publishers that we met with our initial rubric, and narrowed it down to 3 from there, and communicated that to the teacher committee.
Actually, we use what our delegates from each campus, so our teacher from each campus, that went through and narrowed it down in a meeting that we had.
Great, thank you. Let's see, we've got a few more that have come in. So one person wants to know, did you ask for any modeled lessons throughout the year? Was that something you requested?
You know, I never thought about asking for that, or our teachers asking for that, but that is not a bad idea at all, to have that part. And actually, if we could get it, like right now when you do Zoom and you record them, and then we could send that modeled lesson to all the pre-K teachers that are voting and make that determination, that would really be something that I think would be very helpful to them.
I agree. I think that's an excellent idea. Some publishers did have videos already with their products of modeled lessons. But I think it is important to emphasize that teachers look at those to see. I think that's what speaks to teachers the most, is seeing it in action instead of reading the text and the description of what the lessons are. So I think that to ask a publisher to provide that, if it's not there in their provided videos, that would be fair to ask.
So I'm going to jump in really quick and remind some of our guests that are on here. Well, one, so great to see all of you, Ron, Amy, Debbie. It feels like a lifetime, even that we were in El Paso, not that go, Ron. But I do want to remind our publisher friends who are joining us that we really want to have this opportunity for the districts to ask their questions. I think you do have some valuable questions that are coming in, but I am going to ask for you a little bit to be observers and allow our members who are here really wanting to learn more about running a process to have the opportunity to ask those questions. And then I'm happy for publishers to send me directly questions that they would like to get more information about, but let's let some of the people who need to run adoptions have those so that they're able to answer those questions. I did have a really quick question. We talked, early on in this conference about piloting, which I think is not a common practice. Sometimes we feel rushed to order. Did any of the districts that you or any campus do any kind of piloting or try out a full unit or samples before you made your final decision?
I wish we had.
Yeah, we're interested tomorrow to find out more. I think we really didn't know it was an option, so we will be listening closely tomorrow.
I think I echo that same thought, is like to possibly try that and see how well it works.
They did have access to complete units to use them as they were reviewing them, but as far as piloting them, we did not pilot them. Before we narrowed down to 5, though, we had several expert teachers that were piloting various products in anticipation of the adoption, and I was in full communication with them and observing them using those products beforehand.
Great, thank you. All right, we have several questions about voting that are coming in. So did you use traditional voting to make your final decisions? What did your voting structures look like to make your decision?
On my voting structures, what we do is we have a rubric that our district develops, and the rubric probably like for this pre-K has every one of the strands that we're looking for, and it says, did the publisher always have this, sometimes, so forth. And it's basically a 1 through 4, and the campus goes through and fills out the rubric, and that goes through Microsoft Office forms. And once we have that, then it gets onto an Excel sheet, and we just rank what publisher, because we have the 3 publishers on there, and we rank which publisher got the best or the lowest number there, and that determines which publisher we take forward to our board to ratify.
We did something similar. We did create our own rubric based on the TRR, and we gave it to our lead teachers on our committee, and they participated in our meetings and our publisher showcases and all of that, and had the materials on the campus. And we asked them to give their team a copy of the rubric so that they could individually rate the materials and look for those specific things on the rubric. And then what we asked them to do was, whoever the lead was on the campus, gather all of the rubrics and come to a consensus based on what each teacher decided. And then, so each campus submitted 1 vote. Each campus leader submitted 1 vote. And we used Google Forms for ours, same thing, because it creates this wonderful spreadsheet and pie chart and everything that helps you see exactly what the thinking is, how closely it was, or how far apart the 3 choices were. And it seemed to work really well. And we had a deadline. We gave them, I think, a week to, after they'd seen everything, all the meetings and publisher showcase and that kind of thing. We asked them to do it by a specific deadline.
So we did have traditional voting at the district level once the campuses had decided on their vote for kinder through 2nd, and separately 3rd through 5th, both in English and in Spanish. The district or the campus representatives met at the district office, and we had an open vote and actually tallied it on an old chalkboard in the room. So as techie as our district is, we felt like we wanted it to be an open vote so that all could see what was happening. And we're a smaller district, so we had the capability of doing that as a smaller district. Would I go back and use technology for that? Sure. I think that way would have worked just as well. Our assistant superintendent wanted to be involved, and so she was there during the open vote when we conducted that.
Great. We've had another question come in about your structures. So how did you choose the members of your committee? Since this is eventually something that's a pretty dedicated time commitment for people that are involved, how did you make those decisions or make those selections?
I asked the administrators to share 3 to 4 teachers at various grade levels in English and dual language classes. And then once they had submitted those names, I totally agreed with who they had submitted. I did ask for a few additional members who were highly trained in certain areas for ELA to be on that in addition to those that were submitted, and they ended up being an excellent committee. I feel like our administrators needed to be involved, so that's how they were mainly involved.
For us, our principals determine their campus instructional material team. So they're the ones who work with their teachers to decide who the delegate and alternate is for each campus. And they send me, once again through Microsoft Forms, they send me who their delegate and their alternate is. When I'm looking at elementary, I'm looking at like 52 to 53 campuses. So I use the principals to determine who on their campus they're going to have leading the adoption process. And then they let me know who that is.
For our K through 6, we did go with administrators, but for the pre-K, we've had so many changes this last year and a lot of new teachers. So as our department committee, we felt like we knew the teachers maybe a little bit better through our interactions, through our coaching and our professional development, as far as using the rubric and making that decision. So we, as a early childhood department, we chose our teachers. Now we sent the names to the administrators on the campus for permission and feedback before we asked the teachers. But we pretty much chose one teacher from each campus, unless the campus had bilingual classrooms as well. Then we tried to make sure that we had bilingual teachers. We tried to get somebody, we tried to choose teachers who were not in their first or second year, because there's just so much going on right now. We felt like it would just overwhelm them. We don't want them to quit. So we tried to choose people with enough experience to really take on this challenge and this responsibility.
This really is such a commitment by those on the committee. And I agree with you that it would be overwhelming for a new teacher. When we went through this, we were not dealing with COVID. So we did have a couple of teachers on the committee that were in their second, third year, because I did want to see the materials through the eyes of a newer teacher, because I wanted to keep the new teachers in mind through the whole process, because I felt like they would be the ones relying heavily on these materials. But if we were doing it now, I agree, I would not overwhelm a new teacher with this.
But we thought a lot like that, Amy, too. We didn't want to only use the veteran teachers that had been there for 10, 15 years. We did want that perspective, that with that new eye of, oh, I've used this curriculum now for 2, 3 years. You know, what will it look like to have a new? So we tried to pick a good balance, but no first year teachers.
Right.
And on that note, we just got another question in that is from a pre-K teacher at a small school, and they only have one teacher per grade. And for this teacher, it's only their third year of teaching. So do you have any suggestions to help this choice seem less daunting? And that they're saying that they're worried that they will miss an important detail somewhere and want to make sure that they're covering everything. So what advice would you give to someone who is early in their teaching career and is working on this process?
I would really suggest going into the Texas Resource Review on each of the publishers and really looking at that, because that's going to give you, they already have people go in and do a deep dive into the curriculum, because it's very difficult if you're looking at every publisher or even looking at 3 or 4 publishers to make sure of what's really there, because it's very time consuming. But they already did all that work for you. And I would just suggest going in there and knowing what your vision is. What are you really looking for? What is your district need is? What are your students' needs? And make sure that you're able to make sure those publishers have it. And don't be afraid to send the questions to the publishers to see how will your material help us in this way.
I would agree with that. I would absolutely not just look at the percentage score, but pull up the review in those sections that are important to you as your district or as as the teacher who knows what what your students need. And you can't probably look at every single thing. So pick your big rocks that are super important as a district or as a campus, and start from there. And then ask around in your district who has been through this process before, just maybe get a little guidance or expertise from their experience. But don't forget the Texas Resource Review.
I will definitely third that. Looking at the individual indicators in the reports, some of the indicators will speak to you more than others as far as meeting your needs. And so checking that out, and then also trusting yourself as an educator, even with, a couple of years experience, what is best for your classroom, and just vote with confidence on what you feel like would meet the needs of your students the most. And I remember going through the same thing as a second year teacher, and there were certain things that I was looking for and got and used. So I just feel like you need to trust yourself and your expertise. I think that you probably are somebody that will look very thoughtfully into it because you're asking this question. So do it with confidence and use the TRR reviews. It will save you an incredible amount of time, even if you don't fully agree with even what's in the report. The reports have been written and just very carefully. The reviewers have gone into the materials and done their very best to review each indicator. So I would definitely use that as a really great launching pad for you.
All of you have mentioned at some point your district vision or your big rocks. Would you be able to share? I don't expect that you have your visions memorized, but would you be able to share with us what were those big rocks that you were looking for specifically for your district?
Well, one of
for
our
us, it
huge
was,
ones.
oh, sorry.
That's okay. One of our huge ones was dual language, because since our district is dual language, we always look for the material to be offered both in Spanish and English, and we run a 50-50 model. So we look for material that works best in a 50-50 model. We're always we look at what are our students' needs in that area when we're adopting, and we make sure that the material that we're adopting fits towards our district and student needs. I think that's the vision that you really have to look for. What is the vision of your students and district needs at that point, and make sure that the material that you're adopting fits to that. That's why we also have another rubric set aside that's a district rubric, and that district rubric goes into more of what our vision is for that grade level. Because every time may be a little bit different depending if it was a high school grade level, if it's elementary grade level, pre-K grade level. There are differences that we're looking for. It's not always one set vision that we are looking for at that point.
I was just going to share that in our district, what we tried to do was look at a couple of things, the data vertically across grade levels. And for us, we noticed there was always a struggle, I guess, with oral language development vocabulary. So we knew that we needed to really address that. So we wanted to look for materials that support the teachers in effectively teaching vocabulary. So not just that the materials are rich in vocabulary, but how well do the materials support the teachers in making sure that they're giving good, strong, explicit instruction in vocabulary. Another big rock for us was social emotional. We want our kids to develop in all of those skills for sure. Another one was the foundational skills. With the Reading Academy that we're all being trained in now, we know that's we've always known it was important, but we really wanted materials that would address that very, very well. And then another one was writing. Our teachers, we want materials that will support teachers in teaching writing in a way that is authentic and teaches children to go through the developmental stages of writing and use writing as written expression. So we were looking for materials that support that. That was our biggest rocks.
Quality literature in English and in Spanish was very high on the list of our teachers. I did send a Google form to them asking them, you know, what are our greatest needs? If you could have anything, what would you have? And so in those questions, quality literature to help our students fall in love with reading was extremely high on the list, and a great need for us to supplement. Also, best practices in teaching grammar was important. We had trained all of our teachers in a certain practice and felt like we wanted what we purchased to support that. Also with higher level thinking, comprehension practices, but mainly just really having quality literature was important to us. We had already purchased about 5 years ago a really robust foundational literacy program. So while we knew that that was important in this, we knew that if we had to give up a little bit of quality in that in order to get the other, we knew we already had our foundational literacy program set and in place. So those were quality literature, I would say, was our number one.
Great, thank you. We've had a few questions come in about publisher presentations. So the first being, is it helpful to organize publisher presentations? And do you have any tips on how you organized that?
Okay, I'll go ahead. In fact, we have it in our regulation because before we allow publishers to actually to go onto campus to do things, and now the only thing or even to have, like, if they wanted to go to a restaurant, they were allowed to do that at one point. Well, we realized that the publisher is really good at selling their stuff, but it may not be as great as what they're selling, and may not be as great as the food that they gave our teachers or someone at that time. So we went to more of the, we are only allow district sponsored presentations. They cannot interrupt campuses, and they can't have their own campus anymore, because it's unfair if one campus gets to see one publisher and another campus doesn't get to see them. So we went to more of a, we would pick those top 3 publishers or top 4 publishers. We actually went through and had them present to our delegates from each of the campuses. So there were people from every campus there. That's where I said we videotaped earlier what it was that the publisher was showing them, basically videotaped the publisher, and then the rest of the teachers could have an opportunity, and they did not have to leave the campus to see a publisher presentation. Previously to this, I tried to hold after school publisher presentations and invite all the teachers and stuff. I had very low enrollment at those. Maybe 15 people come out of 200 people to come to those publisher presentations. So we changed our method of the publisher presentation to make sure everybody has an opportunity to see them. We do not allow publishers to go onto the campus and interrupt instruction at any time or interrupt PLCs. So the publishers all have to go through me as the instructional materials coordinator. They can deliver materials to the campus, but they cannot interrupt any type of instruction at that time. And we, the only time that they can give, like maybe they'll give a donut or something at a presentation, but they are not to be given gifts of any sort, anything like that, to any of our teachers. It's basically just so that they can look through the material so that we stay with an really unbiased adoption. We don't want anyone to say, hey, I saw this publisher, they gave us this great dinner and all this stuff, and all of a sudden, this is the publisher they're picking. It has nothing to do with the material. It has to do with how well they present it to them. So we're very careful with that side of it.
Our procurement department had us make sure publishers were aware that we are a closed district. And so that meant that they could only communicate with the 2 designated people. So kind of the same thing. They could go to the campuses to deliver the materials, but they could not talk directly to teachers. So I would say our showcases were very, very important, and I would always do that. And I would do as many as we needed to do because it gives the teachers the opportunity to ask those questions. We were able to, when we designed or developed the time for the publisher showcase for the teacher committee, we were able to contact each publisher and say, hey, these are the questions we're getting. These are the things we'd like you to address. And we gave each publisher the same amount of time. We did it all virtual this year, of course. And they each had the same amount of time to present, and then a Q&A time towards the end of that. So I would say they were very helpful for teachers.
Once we had our choices down to 2 products, we did have the publishers present to all ELA teachers and administrators that wanted to attend. So 105 out of 160 of our ELA teachers did attend, and most of our administrators. The publishers did a beautiful job of presenting, and we all had stars in our eyes, but we also had links to the actual products. So I felt like it was fair for them to see what the publishers presented to them. It was important for them to see what the publishers were presenting. And it was also important for them to be able to see the sample products themselves. But I did really a lot of the legwork myself early on to take small groups of teachers to various symposiums or presentations that they did before that. Our committee did partner with a neighboring district to have our committee go and visit several publishers early on also.
Great, thank you. Continuing on that, currently in the world that we're living in, are you still having handheld materials sent to your campuses, or have you all transitioned to doing virtual presentations and having your committees or having teachers view products and have publisher presentations virtually, considering the pandemic and the difficulty with gathering?
So we haven't really started our adoption process yet. We were waiting till the Texas Resource Review came out. We figure out who all our delegates and everyone is. So we're going to start our process during this month and next month. But we are going to do everything this year virtually, and it's going to be virtual material, not just publishers sending material to campuses.
We did ask publishers to deliver whatever sample materials they had and wanted to deliver. So every campus does have some version of the publisher's sample kits. And then at the administration building in our instruction department, we also have sample kits. But all of our showcases and all of our meetings have all been virtual. So they were just dropped off at the campus with the name on the box and left.
Prior to my retirement, I am not sure what the pre-K committee is doing. They are in the audience, but I believe that everything has been virtual so far. And I'm not sure that I have not seen instructional materials being delivered unless they were just to our pre-K center. So I'm not in the loop on what's happening presently.
Great, thank you. We've had another question. Or Melissa, do you want to jump in really quick?
I'm just jumping in back in again. Appreciate you all sharing your advice and best practices. Curious about what considerations you made regarding, I know you shared about professional development and some things that you had wished you'd had got in front of, but going forward, are there specific components of planning for that, like onboarding, and then when there is a changeover, because 8 years is a long time to have materials, what kind of considerations would you now maybe think about as you're going through this or doing this process again, that you might advise some folks on this call as they think about the materials and then plan moving forward?
I would, in retrospect, attend professional development, if at all possible, in another district of the same product, so that I can anticipate what would be shared initially early on, and then give feedback on how to adapt that given the needs of our specific district. In addition, I would roll out the materials much slower than what we did initially. I would have taken small pieces and would have communicated more clearly with teachers expectations as far as using the materials. I will say that because we had a digital adoption during COVID, that was extremely helpful. They were used to using a digital adoption. I would have early on made sure that teachers that needed a physical TE were given a physical TE. But as far as rollout, Melissa, I would have slowed it down. I would have all the bells and whistles that usually come with adoptions and wonderful assessments. I don't think we would have used them quite as quickly as what we did. I think it caused frustration on the part of the teacher because it's overwhelming to take it all on at one time. So that is my advice. Take it slowly so that everybody feels successful.
Thanks, Amy.
For us, what we learned with the previous adoption was to be bold enough to, to, like Amy said, if you have the opportunity to see how what the presentations look like, that would be great. What we did was requested that whoever was presenting from the publisher's company contact us so that we could kind of have a back and forth conversation of, oh, what is your agenda, and can you include this, or could you tweak this, because this is the way we're asking teachers to do it, because we just did not want teachers getting conflicting information in a professional development session. It just made a new adoption all the more difficult if we did that. So I think making sure that that's an option with your PD resources to communicate with what's going to be delivered, whether hopefully one day we're back to face-to-face virtual. And something else, thinking about COVID and all of that, we really want to find out. So if we ever get back where we shut down like we did in March and like we did at the beginning of this school year, what can we use legally? What resources? I would ask that question. We will ask that question. What can we use and not break copyright and not get in trouble? What can be used for virtual? And I think a lot of the publishers are thinking about that these days. So that would be what I would say.
So for us, we always make sure that we buy all our material digital. And then for the earlier ages, we do buy physical material also. Probably the hardest thing with the K through 5 adoption was just getting all the material out to the campuses. We couldn't walk in our warehouse during that time, and then trying to deliver everything. And they wanted it, our curriculum and instruction wanted it delivered yesterday. We would get it, but they wanted it delivered yesterday, and they can't put that much material on a truck and deliver it that quick when you're looking at 52 campuses and stuff. So it took a long time to get the delivery there. So having the material also digital really helped. And then when we did end up going into, we're just first going to open up to kids going to school. About 50% of the kids are going to be in the schools right now, starting in about a week. So it's the first time this year. So we had to have the digital materials in order to get to basically teach this whole school year. So thankfully, we had purchased all digital material. I think some of the hardest thing is with this pre-K adoption for us is since the ELA adoption was so expensive, I do not have really any rollover money from instructional materials. And since the money really doesn't usually come till about September or so, is seen we may not be able to purchase our material till after the school year starts through EMAT. So we're kind of sitting there with, we'll still be using a little bit of last year's material to start the new year before we can even purchase the material. So I think that's one of the things that we really have to look at, and that I'm going to have to go to my finance department and see once, would you be able to almost like loan me some money until the IMA funds come in so we can reimburse you out of the IMA funds at this time so we can get the materials to the campuses a little bit earlier.
So I'm hearing that push from you, Ron, that make sure that we're trying to work hard to get that.
Well, I know it's up to
Once
the
that's
legislators.
set, for sure. Yeah, I do think, I'm glad you brought that consideration up. I think we're in a unique year anytime we move to the new biennium for districts to consider and really think about what does that mean as they start the year and when they decide to make those purchases. So thank you for sharing that. You know, one of the other questions, Dana or Kendrick, I'll add in here, people are asking about final decisions about products. And I think, Ron, with so many schools, you probably have to make a decision early to really think about that, but may have to do with funding. But it probably varies among your different districts as to what the requirements are. So maybe you could share a little bit about when you get to a final decision with like the board and making a final decision with your teams and then getting to the board.
So I'm going to share on that one. Originally, when I took this job 4 years ago, they had a policy in our district, which the final decision had to go to the board by February. So that meant that we almost had to have it done before the new year started. Well, really, the material isn't vetted yet at that time. It's very hard for the teachers to look at the material to come up with what material we needed. So we would start our adoption in October and try to go through December during all the holidays and stuff. And it really was difficult. And then I had to get it on the board agenda by February. Since then, we have changed that policy. So you really have to look at it. You don't certify the TEKS until after March, April time. So we don't really need to go to the board until about April. And the only reason we go to the board at April time is I have had the board one time kick back the adoption. And because they kicked it back, we had to go back and re-look at all the material, determine the material, and try to get it on a month later onto there. So that was in May. I didn't want to really start doing my purchasing after May. I wanted to make sure that we could purchase as much of the material as possible before the end of the school year so that we could start getting that material in June and July, because we start school so early in August, and we would really like to have the material on the campus by that time. So we have taken that pushback from February, and now we go to the board either in March or April, depending on basically the school year. This year, I may be able to go a little bit later just because we're not going to be able to purchase the material like immediately, and it's not going to be a ton of material this time compared to what it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and just to be clear for everybody, with EMAT, our online ordering system, that doesn't have the new products for the year. So the Proclamation 2021 products will be available in May. That's when that starts to come in for you to process those requisitions. We work really hard to get that going right away. But like Ron said, there are some that could be looking at rollover funds, but that's when the materials are available there. So there are some constraints on when you could start ordering using requisitions as well.
For us, historically, the procurement department has asked us to be ready to have it before the board sometime in the spring. I think this year it could be a little bit different. We haven't received the final guidance on that, but typically it's spring, not as early as January or February, but sometime in the spring.
In my experience, we started meeting as a team late fall and then had a decision by the team in March. And I believe it went to the board in May, as late as May. But the timing actually worked for us. It worked fine.
Thank you. We did have a question that I think is more on us about just clarifying. People are asking about how long do you have till you make a purchase? I want to go back to that there is no state requirement about schools making a new purchase. There is a certification that you have instructional materials to teacher standards, and that's a requirement to access your instructional materials, technology and instructional materials allotment. But the decision of when we set these times so that it helps to about the biennium and what funds are and how expensive some products can be or courses over another.
And we have time for probably one or two more questions. So if there's anything else you're wondering about, please feel free to put those in the Q&A. I'll give a few more seconds. Let's see. All right, we've had a few more. Okay, so we did have a question about if you've had to have a runoff. Have you ever had a situation where you had two resources tie when you did your final vote? And what did you do about that? What was your process for handling that?
We haven't necessarily had well, I would say probably very close to a tie. And so what we have discussed is digging deeper into some of the things you mentioned earlier, Ron, bringing in the technology department, to compare say there's two that you're trying to decide between, which one meets our technology requirements. Same thing, we have Schoology and those kind of things. So asking those harder questions that may not necessarily be instructional questions, bringing special ed in for their expertise. What is something that's really, really important to you that between the two seems to fit better? So that's kind of our thinking, is to just pinpoint some of the narrowing down our big rocks maybe a little bit and going beyond into some other things that maybe instruction wouldn't consider to help us decide between two that are very close or tied.
Even though we didn't have a tie and we only really had one campus that wanted another product, I felt like it was extremely important for everybody to feel comfortable with what was decided. So I felt like it was important to communicate with them reasons why others chose another product over that, and to try to understand what was lacking in the product that was chosen for them, what made them not want to choose it, so that we're able to support them. I do not have experience in leading other adoptions, so I can't speak to exactly the question.
Well, I think too, something we would do is, now that we have the resource review, that would be something where we would be able to compare actual evidence that's been looked at very, very closely. If there are specific, like you said, Amy, if there are specific pieces that brought up the, the difference, I guess, in the vote.
And we have what's called the campus instructional material allotment team. And then we have also a district instructional materials allotment team. So if we ended up with a tie with the campus instructional material allotment team, we would use the district allotment team to determine that. And some of their determination may be as much as looking at what is the cost. Is there a difference in the cost of the two materials? And is it going to be a large savings? So that might be right there just enough to determine which company we go with. Or like you say, the district allotment team may feel stronger about one of the products at that point and say, this is the product we're going to go with. So we would bring it up to the district allotment team at that time, which would be able to make that determination.
Great. Thank you all so much. I'm not seeing any additional questions, and we are right about at time in our schedule. So we will go ahead and just say thank you for all of the wisdom and information that you have shared today. I think this was incredibly helpful to hear how an adoption process might work in different areas, in different size districts, and hopefully gave attendees a lot to think about as they continue on their own adoption journey. So thank you all very much. We really appreciate your time today.
You're welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.